Love him or hate him, you've probably heard of him, Elon Musk. Despite what you think of him, it's hard to deny that he has been extremely successful in multiple different industries for a very long period of time. So when someone has been that successful for that long, it warrants looking into how they think about things. So today we're going to take a look at 3 ways that you can think more like Elon. So we're all looking for that edge, that small advantage, anything we can do to get just a little more successful or a little happier. And while it's debatable whether you could say Elon Musk is happy, it's hard to deny how successful he is. So how do we model his success? What can we learn from his approach to thinking through problems and opportunities? Today, we're going to take a look at 3 different ways of thinking that Elon uses and that he contributes a lot of his success to. First off is first principles. Then we're going to cover sunk cost fallacy. And my favorite, always assume you're wrong. I probably could have called this video How to Think Like Aristotle, because a lot of these ideas, they're not new to Elon. He wasn't the first one to come up with them, especially first principles. That dates all the way back to Aristotle. So nothing new there. It's just that Elon's kind of brought that into popularity lately. So Aristotle believed that everything could be broken down into its base components. That once you got something broken down to a certain level, you got to a place where those individual things were undeniably true. You could break it down to where you really understood each individual part instead of assuming the whole. And that's basically what first principles thinking is. It's taking a problem or an idea and breaking it down, tearing down all of the assumptions and getting to the root of the problem or the root of the idea. And then once you get down to that root of the idea, then you can build back up using logic and reasoning that you know is true and see what conclusions you get to from that point. The opposite of that is what's called reasoning by analogy, which is what most people do most of the time. And don't get me wrong, it has its place, because the way first principle thinking is structured, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort. It's not something you can do on every single decision throughout the day. So we need things like reasoning by analogy in order to get through the day in the most efficient way possible. Basically what I'm saying is both first principles thinking and reasoning by analogy are both tools. They're both good tools. It's just you have to know when to apply one and when to apply the other. It kind of goes back to the saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you got to have the right tool for the right problem. And unfortunately, what a lot of people are doing are walking around with a hammer and assuming everything's a nail. So some instances where first principle thinking really shines through. Take, for instance, the iPhone. Before the iPhone, we had cell phones, and everyone was racing to make the next better cell phone. What Steve Jobs did was he took it down to a first principle way of thinking. What's a phone for? What is it trying to accomplish? And then what is it made up of? How can we use it differently to achieve the overall goal that we're trying to achieve? At the time, all cell phones had physical buttons that you had to push. And that was just an assumption that everyone agreed with, that cell phones had buttons. You needed buttons. But Steve Jobs challenged that assumption and said, what are the buttons trying to achieve? Is there a different way we can achieve that? And so by breaking that down on every single step and every single aspect of a phone, he was able to come up with something that solved the same problem a cell phone was solving, but in a much different and a much better way.
And boy, have we patented it.
And that's where you get the iPhone. Elon had a similar situation when, before he started SpaceX, he was actually looking to buy a rocket to send a greenhouse to Mars as a project to try to get NASA to do more. But he went to Russia to try to buy some rockets, and they were astronomically priced, $60 million plus for a decades old design of a intercontinental ballistic missile. And all rockets were priced that way. They were just ridiculously expensive. And that was just the accepted norm. Rockets are expensive to build, they're expensive to make. But Elon stopped and he said, well, what's a rocket made of? You got aluminum, steel, a bunch of different other alloys of metal and these other components, and he actually listed them all out and by weight and calculated, all right, if I was just buying the raw materials, how much would that cost? Well, it wasn't tens of millions of dollars in material, it was tens of thousands of dollars in material. The rocket itself wasn't inherently expensive because of the material. It must have been just a very inefficient way of putting all that material together into a rocket that gives you that astronomical price. So he thought to himself, well, if we can find a better way to put that material together, then we can make a rocket for cheaper. And that's basically first principles thinking, reducing the problem down to the core base knowns that you can prove, and then using reasoning and logic to build back up to a conclusion. Instead of reasoning by analogy where you take other people's assumptions and draw a conclusion. So if that's the case, then why would you ever want to reason by analogy? Well, like I said, if you can't make every single decision throughout the day with first principles thinking, you can't go down to the base level of, say, clothing in the morning. What's a t-shirt trying to accomplish? What's its base materials made out of? Is there a different form factor to go with? Is there a different way to make the shirt and source the shirt and on and on and on? So in some instances, taking that shortcut of reasoning by analogy makes sense. It's all about where you apply the right tools. So typically you want to use first principle thinking on big decisions, on decisions that are going to set the direction of a company or the direction of your career. Those type things you want to review and look at and break down and make sure your assumptions are correct and build up from truths that you know using logic and reasoning to come to conclusions that you can trust. The next thing to keep in mind is sunk cost fallacy. Say you've been developing a product for your company for the past 2 years, you have millions invested in it, and then right before the release, something happens in the industry and everything changes. Your product is now obsolete. Like the iPhone, for that example. If you were another company developing the next best flip phone, and then the iPhone comes out, well, do you keep developing your flip phone as the next greatest best thing when obviously the market's now turned to something else? A lot of people have trouble killing a project that they have a lot of time and money sunk into, even though they know it's now the wrong direction to be going. And that's basically what the sunk cost fallacy is. It's basically if you're trying to drive west and the first 2 hours of your trip you drive east, and then you realize you're driving in the wrong direction, but you don't turn around because you've already driven this far. You don't want that time and that distance to be wasted. So you keep driving in the wrong direction. And unfortunately, this is common and it's extremely costly. And a lot of companies end up sinking because of it. And that's one of the things that Elon Musk is unusually good at, is completely quitting on an idea, regardless of how much time, energy, and money has been put into it, if it's been revealed that it's now the wrong path to be on. A couple of examples where this has happened in his companies, the first one being at Tesla with their factories. Originally, Elon wanted to make a completely automated factory with no people working in it. He wanted to build the machine that built machines. Very ambitious idea. Car plants are not built that way. They don't operate that way. But just like him building inexpensive rockets, this was a first principle based thing. If I can make a robot that will do it, then I can save time and money and make a cheaper car and get the car into more people's hands. Great idea. Turned out to be a lot harder problem than they originally anticipated. There's just some things that having a person do is 1,000 times easier than trying to make a robot that can do it. They eventually figured that out and had to scrap the whole idea of making a fully automated plant, and now they have a more conventional factory making cars. But that was years of time and money invested towards a goal which they eventually cut off. They also ran into this problem at SpaceX. Elon is building a rocket that he wants to take people to Mars in. It's a revolutionary rocket design that they're trying to pull off. And one of the big things about rockets is you have to have it very light and very strong. So carbon fiber is extremely light and extremely strong. So that's what they started building the rockets out of. And they spent years and millions of dollars developing different ways to work with carbon fiber to make huge fuel tanks and things like that. Well, once they got into the testing phase of it, they realized that carbon fiber, when you get it really, really cold, like you have to store liquid fuel at sub-zero temperatures, it's very brittle. And so you have to put insulation in there. And when it gets really hot, like when it's going through the atmosphere, it gets really soft. So you have to put shielding on it. So now you've got very expensive carbon fiber, the added weight of insulation, and the added weight of shielding. Well, now it's not lightweight anymore. It's even more expensive and more complicated. So they scrapped it. They completely switched the material they're building the entire rocket out of and had to start from scratch. But that's something you have to be able to do. Otherwise, you're just going to keep going down the wrong path and wasting more money, wasting more time. So the key is to try to make the right decision in the moment, in the present. Regardless of how much time and money you've invested in the wrong thing in the past, you have to make the right decision for the future. You are always wrong. So this is my favorite, hands down, because it is just pure logic and reasoning, and for some reason that just makes me happy. So the idea goes this way, that no one's perfect. I think everyone can buy into that as a fundamental truth. Nobody's perfect. And you can continue that line of reasoning down that your decisions, therefore, are not all perfect. Each decision is not the perfect decision. So if you're not 100% correct, if you're not 100% the absolute most right you could possibly be, then some percentage of that decision is wrong. You are wrong in the sense that you are not 100% perfectly correct. So that shifts the goal from trying to be correct to trying to be less wrong. That's good for you on a couple of different levels. One, it makes you be a little more humble. You can't be too full of yourself if you are saying on every decision that I'm just trying to be less wrong. An example of this with Elon is with the rocket he's trying to build to go to Mars. Nobody's ever designed a ship of this size and this scope and with these goals in mind. So they don't know exactly how to do it. So they go into it with the mindset knowing that these design decisions that we're making, these engineering steps that we're taking, some of them are going to be wrong, and we know that ahead of time. So when something happens, say like carbon fiber not being the right decision, when that comes up, it's expected because they knew going in that they were going to be at least some percentage wrong, and they were expecting to have to make changes along the way. And so the idea that you're always wrong is really developed out of a first principles way of thinking and makes becoming susceptible to sunk cost fallacy more difficult. So it's a really good tie in between the two different thought patterns, two different thought methods. And so with all three of them, you get a lot of synergy with it that just really helps you think through problems and come up with solutions that other people otherwise wouldn't. And so I've found it very helpful when I'm trying to make decisions, especially really important decisions, that I look into the toolkit and I try to see, all right, what tactic, what mind frame, thought pattern is going to be best suited for this? What can I apply to the situation to get the most out of it? And I think that's something that a lot of people should put more time and effort into, is not only thinking about problems, but thinking about how they're thinking about problems. With that, there's a lot more to this than what we've gone over in the video. There's a ton of resources out there that really dive deep into each one of these and other thought models that you can get into. And I will have links for all that kind of stuff down below in the description. And if you have any other resources that you like, be sure to put them in the comments. I'm always looking for other places to gain some more insight and information and different tools I can add to my tool bag. And if you've enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.